They told her to stay in her place. They told him to lower his voice. They told the courtroom to ignore the truth. But Naima Carter didn't come to play by their rules. And Ellis Ray, he wasn't going to vanish quietly. When the system tried to bury the evidence, she unearthed it. When the judge tried to silence her, she made them all listen. This isn't just a courtroom drama. This is what happens when justice stops knocking and kicks the damn door in. If you're tired of stories being rewritten to protect the powerful, subscribe now, like this video, and turn on the bell so you never miss the truth again. The sound of the courtroom door closing wasn't loud, but it was final. Naima Carter didn't flinch when it echoed through the chamber, but she felt it, not in fear, but in memory. She had heard that exact sound when she was 13, sitting 3 rows back in a courtroom where her uncle had pleaded guilty to a crime he didn't commit, because the evidence to prove otherwise had been conveniently lost. That thud had sealed more than just a room. It had sealed futures. Now, 15 years later, Naima wasn't sitting in the gallery anymore. She was standing at counsel's table in a fitted gray blazer, palms flat against cold wood, waiting for her case to be called. Across from her sat Ellis Ray, a 20-year-old college sophomore, shoulders square but eyes down, like he was still trying to shrink out of the story being written around him. He'd been arrested after an alleged altercation during a traffic stop. No weapons found, no injuries, just the accusation that he'd acted erratically and posed a potential threat. They said he lunged, but the footage told another story. At least, the part of the footage they hadn't ruled inadmissible. Naima turned slightly toward her client. "You okay?" He nodded once but didn't speak. The handcuffs under his sleeves clinked faintly when he shifted. It was a sound that didn't belong in this room, not on his wrists, not in this life. The judge's door opened. Conversations froze mid-word. Judge Meredith Klein stepped out, robes pristine, hair in a tight knot, posture stiff with the kind of confidence that didn't have to prove itself anymore. She walked with a click-click rhythm that echoed like punctuation marks. Her eyes swept the courtroom and then landed on Naima. They didn't blink. For 3 long seconds, they stayed locked, and Naima could feel what the judge wasn't saying. "You don't belong here." But you already know that. Judge Klein took her seat with the grace of someone who had never once been questioned in a room built to protect her authority. "Call the next case," she said flatly. The clerk stood. State of Illinois versus Ellis Ray, charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. Naima rose slowly. Her voice was clear, crisp, unshaken. "Defense is present, Your Honor." The judge glanced over the folder in front of her. "Miss Carter, private counsel." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Klein arched a brow slightly, lips tightening. "Interesting. Someone has money to burn." There was a chuckle from one of the officers seated near the gallery. Naima didn't react. She had heard worse in nicer rooms. "I was retained because Mr. Ray believes the truth deserves a fighting chance." The judge's mouth curved. "Barely. That's a lovely sentiment. Let's see how it holds up against the law." Naima sat down, spine straight, eyes forward. Ellis whispered. "She hates you," Naima replied without turning. "She doesn't know me yet, but she already hates what I represent." He blinked. "And what's that?" Her voice was calm. "Accountability." Behind them, the courtroom door opened again, and this time, someone new stepped in, a tall man in a beige coat, carrying nothing but a manila folder and the air of someone who had come to observe, not speak. Naima noticed him, just briefly. Then she returned her focus to the bench. The trial hadn't started, but the lines had already been drawn. Naima Carter had practiced law for 8 years, argued in 12 jurisdictions, and faced 3 separate judges who outright refused to let her finish a full opening statement. But Judge Meredith Klein, she was different. She didn't interrupt out of impatience. She did it with precision, like cutting a flower stem quick, clean, and with full knowledge of what she was silencing. "Let's proceed with opening statements," Klein announced. The prosecutor, Dean Wexler, stood clean-cut, confident. the kind of man who knew juries liked him even before he opened his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began. What should have been a routine stop became anything but. Officer Green followed protocol. The defendant, Mr. Ray, chose not to. He acted erratically, raised his voice, made sudden movements. These are not just unfortunate behaviors. They are dangerous. Naima didn't flinch, but her client did. She noticed the slight twitch in Ellis's jaw, the way his fingers tapped the table twice, then stopped like trying to will himself still. Wexler continued. "This is not about race, or politics, or the news cycle. This is about law. This is about safety. This is about a choice Mr. Ray made when he failed to comply." He finished with a nod and returned to his seat, folding his hands like a man confident the hardest part of his day was already behind him. Naima rose, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to make the room shift slightly in attention. She walked slowly to the center, looked directly at the jury. "I won't ask you to imagine fear. I won't ask you to imagine being stopped by an officer who won't tell you why. I won't ask you to imagine what it's like to reach for your license and wonder if that movement might end your life." She paused, because Ellis Ray didn't imagine it. He lived it. A beat. Fear is not a crime. Someone shifted in the gallery. The judge frowned slightly. Naima continued. "The footage you won't be shown tells the story clearly." Mr. Ray's hands stayed in plain sight. His voice was tense but controlled. He asked questions. That was his offense. Not aggression. Not violence. Questions. Judge Klein tapped her gavel lightly. "Miss Carter, stick to the facts. No editorializing." Naima nodded. "The facts are what I'm here for." She turned back to the jury. "You will hear that he was a threat, but no weapon was found. You will hear that he was combative, but no officer was injured. You will hear a version of Ellis Ray that fits into a narrative you've been fed before. I ask only one thing. Listen carefully, because sometimes the most dangerous thing in this courtroom isn't what's said, it's what's left out." She sat, and for a moment, the courtroom was unusually quiet. Not respectful quiet, calculating quiet. Judge Klein cleared her throat. "Prosecution, call your first witness." Officer Green entered in full uniform, polished and pressed. He walked with the posture of someone who knew the room leaned in his favor. Wexler led him through his version. Stop initiated for a broken taillight. Suspect agitated. Raised voice. Reached quickly into glove compartment. Standard procedure. Raised concern. Force used to subdue. Naima didn't interrupt. She didn't object. She just waited. Then she rose. "Officer Green, how long have you served on the force?" 12 years. "And in that time, how many stops have you made alone?" "Hundreds. In those stops, how often have you drawn your weapon?" He paused. "Depends." Naima tilted her head. "Rough estimate. Maybe a dozen times." She nodded. "And how many of those individuals were white males?" The pause was longer this time. "I don't have that data." Naima leaned in slightly. "But you remember faces, don't you?" "Objection." Wexler snapped. "Irrelevant." Judge Klein didn't hesitate. Sustained. "Move on." Naima stepped back. "One more question. Officer, did the department review the audio from your body mic?" He blinked. It malfunctioned, and the cruiser dash cam wasn't recording. Naima paused just long enough. Then, "So, we're relying on your memory, your written statement, and the assumption that Mr. Ray was the threat." "Objection again." Judge Klein this time didn't speak. She simply stared at Naima, the kind of stare meant to end things. Naima smiled, just barely. No further questions. She returned to her seat slowly. Ellis leaned in. "They're never gonna believe me." "Are they?" Naima kept her eyes forward. "They don't need to believe you yet." He frowned. "Then what?" she whispered. "They just need to start doubting him." And behind them, in the last row, the man in the beige coat slid a phone from his pocket. He typed something quickly. "She's beginning to shift the room." After Officer Green stepped down, a noticeable tension lingered in the room. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of what hadn't been said, the silence of the missing footage, the silence of Ellis Ray's side of the story, the silence the court seemed comfortable with, Naima Carter didn't fill that silence with outrage. She filled it with precision. She rose as the clerk called the next witness, Deputy Travis Mandel, the officer who arrived just after the shots were fired. He walked in with slow confidence, the kind that says, "I back my brothers no matter what." His badge gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. Wexler's questions were predictable. "Yes." Officer Green called for backup. "Yes." "Mr. Ray was already restrained when you arrived." "Yes." He seemed combative, emotionally unstable. Naima kept her arms folded across her notes, calm, waiting, until it was her turn. She stood, walked slowly to the witness box, and glanced at Mandel. "Deputy Mandel, do you recall what Mr. Ray was doing when you entered the scene?" "He was yelling. Yelling, loud, angry, erratic." "Was he threatening anyone?" "No, but he was aggressive in tone." Naima nodded. "And how do you define aggressive in tone?" Mandel blinked, raised voice, loud words. She took a step closer. "And were those words violent?" He paused. "Not violent. Profane." "Not really." "So, to clarify for the jury, you are testifying under oath that a black teenager, recently handcuffed, bleeding from the shoulder, was raising his voice, and that was threatening." Wexler stood. "Objection." "Argumentative." "Sustained." Judge Klein said. Naima nodded. "Let me rephrase. Deputy Mandel, was Mr. Ray's voice louder than yours right now?" He shifted in his seat. "Possibly." "Thank you." No further questions. She sat back down. The jury was watching her more now, not just politely, but actively. One juror, a middle-aged woman in a maroon blazer, had stopped taking notes. She was leaning forward. Judge Klein called for a brief recess. As the courtroom emptied into hushed conversation, Naima remained seated. She didn't go for water. She didn't check her phone. She sat perfectly still, eyes ahead. Ellis looked over at her. "How do you stay so calm?" Naima turned to him, eyes sharp. "Because panic is what they're hoping for. Chaos makes you easier to dismiss." He nodded slowly, and then he whispered, almost like he was asking himself, "Do you think I scare them?" Naima didn't smile. She didn't comfort him. She said, "Yes, but not for the reason you think." He looked confused. She added, "They're not afraid you'll attack. They're afraid you'll speak, and that someone might actually listen." When court reconvened, the gallery was more crowded. More reporters, more phones out. The man in the beige coat had not moved, but now he had company, a woman in dark-rimmed glasses beside him, typing rapidly on a compact keyboard. Judge Klein called the courtroom back to order. Naima stood. Defense calls Officer Lena Vargas to the stand. There was a ripple through the gallery. Officer Vargas had not been included in the prosecution's witness list. She was the desk sergeant who processed the intake paperwork. Neutral. Forgotten. She stepped forward, unsure, her uniform crisp, but her eyes uncertain. Naima smiled politely. "Thank you for being here." Vargas nodded. "Officer Vargas, when Mr. Ray was booked, do you recall what he said?" She hesitated. "He asked for a lawyer." "Before that," she frowned, thinking, "he said, I didn't do anything." Naima nodded. "Did he resist intake? Argue? Threaten?" "No." He was quiet. "Did you notice any visible injuries?" "Yes." A wound in his shoulder. Dried blood. Naima leaned in slightly. "Was he given medical attention immediately?" Pause. "Not immediately." "No." "And in your professional opinion, should he have been—" Wexler stood quickly. "Objection speculative." Naima looked directly at the judge. "The question is based on the officer's own training and protocol." "Your Honor." Judge Klein hesitated. Then, overruled. "She may answer." Vargas cleared her throat. "Yes, he should have been seen right away." The room shifted. Not loudly, but like a tide that had changed directions. Naima smiled faintly. "Thank you, officer." No further questions. She sat, and behind her, Ellis let out a breath so quiet it barely disturbed the air, and Naima heard it. And in the back row, the man in the beige coat sent another message. She just moved the middle jurors. 2 are no longer neutral. Naima Carter knew how to read juries. The maroon blazer woman had stopped blinking so often. The younger man near the end of the row, arms no longer crossed. They weren't convinced yet, but they were paying attention. Now it was time to make them remember. Your Honor, Naima stood, voice composed. The defense would like to revisit our motion to introduce supplemental audio from the civilian who filmed the encounter. Judge Klein didn't even look up. Denied. That request has already been ruled on. Naima didn't move. Respectfully. New context from Officer Vargas's testimony alters. Miss Carter. The judge interrupted, eyes now lifted, sharp as glass. We are not here to relitigate procedural rulings. Naima took a breath. Then the defense requests the court note for the record that the jury will not be permitted to hear independent audio that captures Officer Green shouting a racial slur before drawing his weapon. Gasps flickered through the gallery like sparks. Wexler nearly tripped over his chair, rising. That is unsubstantiated. Naima turned toward him. The audio was authenticated by a third-party lab. Miss Carter, Judge Klein snapped. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Naima stared at her, silent. Then, slowly, she returned to her table. But the damage had been done in the best way. The jury had heard it. They weren't supposed to. But now it lived in the cracks between what they were allowed to know. Ellis leaned in. That was real. That he said that. Naima nodded once. It always is. The only question is whether someone catches it. He whispered. Then why won't they let it in? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The judge's silence had done that for her. Across the room, the man in the beige coat tapped a message to someone unseen. She forced the court to censor truth in front of 12 people under oath. That sticks. The next witness was Dr. Langford, a trauma specialist called to testify about Ellis's state post-arrest. Wexler objected to his inclusion irrelevant, he said. Klein hesitated, then allowed limited questioning. Naima approached the stand with care. This was her precision round. Dr. Langford, when you examined Ray, what symptoms did you observe? Muscle tension, heightened startle reflex, fractured clavicle, and signs of acute psychological stress. Are those symptoms consistent with someone who has been restrained and shot? Yes. Were there signs of aggression? None. Were there signs of fear? He looked directly at the jury. Overwhelmingly. Naima turned to Wexler. Your witness. Wexler barely asked 2 questions. Something about timing and documentation before sitting down. He looked rattled, like he'd just realized the foundation was shifting beneath his feet. The court recessed for lunch. Outside, reporters waited. Naima didn't stop for them, but one voice called out Miss Carter. Any comment on the alleged audio? She turned, just for a second, and said, The truth doesn't need my comment. It needs a microphone. Inside the courthouse cafeteria, the woman with the dark-rimmed glasses from the gallery handed a USB drive to a technician behind the AV desk. No names, she said. Just play the backup copy. The technician hesitated. I can't run anything not approved. She looked him dead in the eyes. Don't run it. Just load it. In case someone asks. He took the drive. She walked away. Back in the courtroom, Naima sat alone for a few minutes before Ellis returned. She had a notebook open, but wasn't writing. Her eyes were distant, focused on a memory too old to belong to the present moment. Her father, a school janitor, pulled over once after picking her up from spelling bee practice. They'd won that day. She remembered how excited she was. She also remembered how small she felt when the officer asked her father if the car was really his. You look nervous, the cop had said. Am I supposed to be calm? Her father replied, quiet but firm. That night, they got home 2 hours late. No ticket, no arrest, just the damage. And now she sat across from another black man accused of doing too much in the presence of a badge. She closed the notebook. When Judge Klein returned, her expression was sharper, like she'd spent lunch being reminded who still held the gavel. "The court will proceed," she announced. "Miss Carter, your next witness." Naima stood. We called Jordan Abrams to the stand. A young woman in a yellow blouse stood slowly from the gallery. She was 18, high school senior, the one who filmed the stop. Wexler jumped to his feet. "Objection. This witness was not disclosed on the original list." Naima held up a document. "Your Honor, her name appears in the original discovery. The prosecution failed to subpoena her." Judge Klein narrowed her eyes. "I'll allow it for now." Jordan took the stand, nervous but determined. Naima walked toward her like one would approach a fragile truth. "Jordan, were you present the morning Ellis Ray was arrested?" "Yes." "Did you see the encounter?" "I saw everything." "Did you film it?" "Yes." Naima stepped closer. "And why did you start recording?" Jordan looked toward Ellis. "Because the cop had his hand on his gun before he said a word." The courtroom went completely still. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was waiting, watching, and in that stillness, Naima said, "No further questions." The courtroom wasn't breathing. Jordan Abrams sat on the witness stand, hands trembling slightly but eyes steady, and her words still hung in the air like smoke after a spark. "Because the cop had his hand on his gun before he said a word." Judge Klein shifted in her seat. Prosecutor Wexler stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit like the fabric might hold him together. "Miss Abrams," he said, "you claim to have recorded the incident." "Yes," she answered. "And where is this recording?" Jordan looked at Naima, then at the judge. Naima stood. The original was deleted after Jordan's phone was confiscated and returned corrupted. However, Wexler pounced. "Then there's no proof, only hearsay." Naima didn't flinch. The footage was mirrored to a cloud backup before deletion. That file was preserved. "I've submitted a digital chain of custody." Judge Klein raised an eyebrow. "Miss Carter, you're attempting to introduce new evidence during active testimony." Naima stepped forward. "No, Your Honor. I'm simply referencing it for context to explain this witness's credibility." Wexler objected again. "This is a backdoor attempt to get suppressed material in front of the jury." The judge looked at Naima. Naima didn't blink. If they're going to decide whether Ellis Ray is guilty, they deserve to know what he actually went through. Klein's jaw locked. The jury will disregard any mention of cloud backups or deleted files. But the jury had already heard it. More importantly, they had already seen Jordan. A teenager, no agenda, no badge, no motive, just her eyes. And fear. Naima sat back down. Jordan was dismissed from the stand. And as she stepped down, she cast one more glance at Ellis. She didn't say anything, but her look said everything. "I saw you, and I didn't look away." As the court moved to admit the next round of procedural testimony chain of command reports, internal assessments, paperwork designed to blur truth with protocol, Naima let her mind drift. Not from distraction, from focus. She wasn't just building a defense. She was building doubt, layer by layer. Each silence from the court, each refusal to admit evidence, each contradiction left hanging in the open, all of it was being stacked like stones. And soon, it would crush the state's version of the truth. Ellis whispered to her. "They're not going to let me go." She turned to him, voice quiet but unshaken. "They don't have to let you go. They just have to stop believing you deserve to stay." He looked confused. Naima added, "People don't unsee truth, even if they pretend to." The next witness was called Officer Kellen Hart, internal investigator. Cold, procedural, expert at looking neutral. His job was to make it all sound normal. His voice carried the weight of training manuals and department lingo. Standard approach, reasonable force. Subject did not comply. Officer Green followed department expectations. Naima stood, slow and deliberate. "Officer Hart, did you interview Officer Green directly?" "Yes." "Did you speak to Ellis Ray?" "No. I reviewed his intake notes." "So, You concluded he was aggressive without speaking to him. Hart blinked. His behavior was documented. Naima tilted her head. By who? Officer Green. Naima smiled faintly. So you reviewed the incident based entirely on the perspective of the man under review. He hesitated. Naima took one step closer. You used the accused's version of events to clear the accused. Objection. Wexler muttered, but even he sounded tired now. Withdrawn, Naima said. Let's just call it what it is. A system investigating itself. She returned to her seat, and for the first time, one of the jurors turned fully toward Ellis. Not toward Naima, not toward the judge. Him, as if remembering he was a person. Behind them, the man in the beige coat typed into his device. Jury no longer tracks the state's narrative. She's peeled the skin off procedure. Naima opened her notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote just one word in the margin. Shifted? Because she could feel it. The courtroom wasn't on her side yet, but it had stopped walking against her. And sometimes, that's all you need for the tide to turn. The mood in the courtroom had changed. You could feel it in the way the jury leaned forward instead of back. You could hear it in how the gallery had stopped whispering altogether, and you could see it in the stiff shoulders of Dean Wexler, who now fidgeted with his pen between objections, and in Judge Klein's pauses, just a little longer than before. Naima Carter had cracked something open, not loudly, but wide enough for the truth to seep through. She rose from her seat, holding a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, she said, the defense would like to submit a written statement from a retired officer who served alongside Officer Green for 8 years. Wexler was already out of his chair. Hearsay, not subject to cross-examination. Naima didn't argue. She simply looked at the judge. Klein's mouth tightened. Denied. Naima lowered the paper, but not before every eye in the room had seen the heading. Regarding Officer Green's documented hostility during stops involving black males. A silence wrapped around that moment. The kind of silence that didn't ask questions. It remembered. Naima turned back to the jury and didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The words had already been said. Even in silence, the record was beginning to shout. Judge Klein called for a recess. As the courtroom emptied, Naima remained at the table. Ellis sat beside her, knuckles pale from gripping his knees. You keep trying to get things in, and they keep shutting it down. Naima turned slightly toward him, and every time they do, it tells the jury something louder than evidence. He raised an eyebrow. She leaned in, that they're afraid of what we're not allowed to say. Ellis swallowed hard. Across the room, the woman with the dark-rimmed glasses from earlier passed Naima a folded note on her way out. Naima opened it under the table. Audio drive loaded. Operator on standby. Signal when ready. Her thumb brushed the edge of the paper once. When the court returned from recess, the air was heavier, like everyone expected something to happen, but didn't know what it would be. Judge Klein's voice cut across that tension like a blade. Defense may call its final witness. Naima stood. The defense calls Ellis Ray. A ripple spread. Not outrage, not surprise. Just attention, the kind that says, this matters now. Ellis stood slowly, not because he was reluctant, but because something about the weight of standing in this courtroom made your body move like it didn't belong to you. He made his way to the witness stand. Palms flat, breath uneven. Naima approached slowly. Ellis, she said gently, do you remember the first thing you said when Officer Green stopped you? He nodded once. I asked. Why he pulled me over. Did you raise your voice? No. Did you resist? No. Did you make any movements that could be perceived as threatening? I reached for my license, Ellis said, just like I was taught, both hands on the wheel first. Signal, then reach slow. Naima paused. Let the words breathe. What happened after you reached? He pulled his weapon. There it was. Raw. Quiet. Simple. Did he say anything? Ellis blinked. Once. Then again. He told me to get out of the damn car. Called me. He stopped. Naima didn't push. but she didn't fill the silence either. Ellis swallowed. "He called me a boy. Said I looked like trouble." The jury didn't shift this time. They froze. Naima stepped back, and then, without waiting for permission, without looking at the judge, she turned toward the technician's booth and gave a subtle nod. A soft click, then static, and then his voice, "Get out of the damn car. Boy." One sentence, sharp, crackling, unmistakable. The courtroom gasped not loudly, but collectively, like one breath taken in too late. Judge Klein stood instantly. "Miss Carter, turn that off immediately." Naima didn't move. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this is evidence, unaltered, authenticated. And it speaks for itself," Wexler shouted. "That file was ruled inadmissible." Naima's voice never rose. "No, it was ruled inconvenient." Judge Klein slammed her gavel. "Miss Carter, if you don't," but it was too late. Because the jury wasn't looking at the judge. They were looking at Ellis, at his shaking hands, at the tears he didn't wipe away, at the truth. Naima turned toward the bench, her voice even, eyes unblinking. "You can silence my questions. You can deny my motions. But you cannot unhear what was just said. And neither can this jury." The judge was trembling now, not in fear, but in fury. "You're in contempt of this court." Naima nodded once. "And this court has been in contempt of justice." She didn't move. She didn't back down. Behind her, Ellis whispered something, just 2 words. "Thank you." Judge Meredith Klein's face was a mask of control, but it was cracking. Her gavel sat on the bench like a weapon she hadn't swung hard enough. She leaned forward, voice barely keeping pace with her authority. "This courtroom is now in recess. Bailiff, clear the gallery." But it was already too late. The gallery wasn't moving. They weren't shouting. They weren't resisting. They were just staying, watching, witnessing, because something had changed, and they knew it. Naima Carter remained standing, hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't defiant. She was inevitable. The technician who had played the recording had disappeared behind a locked booth door. The sound system was silent again. But its echo, "Get out of the damn car," boy, still vibrated through the walls. Wexler tried to salvage it. He rose, flustered but steady. "Your Honor, the defense has violated court protocol, introduced inadmissible evidence, and manipulated jury perception." Naima responded without turning. "The only thing manipulated in this courtroom has been the truth." Judge Klein banged the gavel again. "Miss Carter." But her voice cracked on the word Carter. She realized it too late. Naima turned slowly. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She just said, "That's the first time you've said my name correctly this entire trial." The silence was instant, not stunned, ashamed. A beat passed, then another, and then movement. From the back row, the man in the beige coat stood. He didn't move quickly. He moved like someone who had waited long enough. He walked toward the bailiff's box, nodded once, and handed over a slim black folder. The bailiff scanned the document, eyes narrowing. He stepped toward the bench. "Your Honor, you need to see this." Judge Klein hesitated, then took it. As she flipped through the first few pages, her expression shifted, from annoyed to confused, from confused to pale. The file had the DOJ's seal. Inside it were transcripts, audio logs, statements, digital forensics, and at the top, a summary sheet, "Coordinated suppression of exculpatory evidence by Officer Green, in collusion with local DA staff, involving repeated patterns targeting blackmail defendants." Judge Klein read silently. Wexler stood frozen. The jury sat stunned. And in the middle of it all, Ellis Ray, still seated in the witness box, was staring not at Naima, not at the judge, but at the gallery, at Jordan Abrams, at the woman who had filmed him, at the person who hadn't let him disappear. Judge Klein's fingers curled around the paper. "This trial is adjourned." Her voice was smaller now. Naima's eyebrows lifted faintly. "Pardon me, Your Honor, but are you dismissing the case?" Judge Klein didn't answer. She just stood and walked out. No gavel, no ruling, just absence. Wexler followed, shoulders tight. The courtroom buzzed, first softly, then rising. People stood, unsure of what had just happened. Naima turned to Ellis. "You're not free yet," she said gently, "but you're closer." He blinked. That really happened?" Naima smiled faintly. Truth has a way of surviving courtroom protocol. Across the room, the beige-coated man removed his earpiece and made one final call. She cracked it. "Now send the rest." Outside, unmarked SUVs pulled up along the courthouse curb. Inside, the jury still hadn't moved. Some were crying. Some were stone still. Some were standing, not walking, just standing. Like maybe this time, they wouldn't look away. Ellis Ray stepped down from the witness box, not like a free man, but like someone who no longer had to prove he deserved to exist. Naima walked beside him, slow, measured, her heels tapping out a rhythm that sounded less like defiance and more like declaration. The courtroom was still full, but no one spoke. They were holding something sacred. Not triumph, not justice, yet, but memory. At the far end of the gallery, Jordan Abrams wiped a tear from her cheek and mouthed, "You're okay now." Ellis nodded once. He believed it. For the first time, Judge Klein never returned to the bench. She left her robe behind literally. When the bailiff stepped into her chambers minutes later, he found it hanging on the back of her chair, the gavel resting beside it. Resignation. In silence, outside, the courthouse steps were lined with quiet. No protest. No reporters yelling questions. Just people waiting. Watching? When Naima and Ellis emerged, someone in the crowd whispered his name. Then another. And another, not like a chant, like a prayer. He looked around, eyes wide, breathing shallow. "What do I do now?" Naima put a hand on his shoulder. "You walk. Not fast, not proud, just free." He blinked like he didn't understand the word yet. But then he stepped forward, and the crowd parted. No applause, just space. Naima followed, heart racing, though her face didn't show it. Behind them, the man in the beige coat stood near the edge of the building. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just watched. Then he turned to his team. "File the rest. Expose every suppressed case linked to Green, Wexler, and Klein." Inside the courthouse, a clerk opened a locked drawer and found the sealed complaints from 6 other defendants, every one of them filed. Time-stamped and buried. Now unsealed. Now undeniable. The DOJ made its move within the hour. Officers were placed under suspension. The DA's office issued a public statement. Vague, cautious, legal. But the people already knew, because truth, once spoken, doesn't go back in the vault. It lingers. Naima returned to her office that evening, exhausted. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sat. For a long time, then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Because of you. I believe the system might bend, maybe not break, but bend." A juror. She stared at the screen, then placed it face down. The next day, Ellis Ray walked into the same high school where he'd been suspended twice for attitude. This time, he spoke in front of the senior class. He didn't prepare a speech. He just said, "Don't let the world convince you that your voice is a problem." The auditorium didn't cheer. They stood, and that was enough. Naima never gave interviews, but her inbox was full of young law students asking for internships. She responded to only one. "Your name." "Zaire." "Why law?" "Because someone told the truth, and I saw what it could do." Naima smiled. One story, one truth, and now one ripple, becoming waves. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it trembles. But on the day Naima stood her ground, and a young man refused to be erased, it echoed. This story wasn't just about one trial. It was about a system forced to look in the mirror, and what it saw was finally undeniable. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that truth still matters, then hit that subscribe button, give it a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because here at RonStories, we don't just tell stories, we make sure they're never forgotten.